this and worked into his backyard that the canyon backed onto. At first,
let's pause it. Head to bed, wake up in the morning. It's another day. Yo. Here, and close it, yo. Here, close it, head to bed. It's another day. When my fucking connection is gonna fucking contact me. Hello? It's true here. Smoking blunt for day, what you
thought
do?
he just found an awesome fossil, but after getting an expert to come and inspect it, they discovered the fossil was between 14 and 16 million years old. It turned out to be a rare white fossil, so rare in fact, it's one of only 20 on Earth. People have looked for this for decades, but Gary simply found it right by his backyard. Next up is coin. We've already had one amazing $11 million coin find on this list. Now this coin may not be worth the same amount, but the coin on its own is rarer. But it's how they found it which makes this story so hilarious. One guy needed to go to the bathroom, but he was busy in his large backyard. So he decided to take a sneaky go in the bush. However, as
me and my mum just moved in the neighbourhood and I was wondering if I could join you. Sure, go ahead.
It may not be $11
Thank
million
you.
worth of coins, but the coin on its own was valued at over $20,000. Next up is ball. We all probably have a ball in our yard, whether it be a basketball,
What's
football,
your
or
name?
baseball. But in 2014,
Amy.
one Reddit
What about
user made
you?
an amazing discovery in his backyard. He found a golf ball all the way from 1899 in his backyard in the Bronx.
So, how are you,
He wasn't
Amy?
sure what it was at first, so he put it on Reddit.
19 years old. What about you?
Patent information.
16.
This allowed him to value the
Cool.
ball too, and an expert said it could be worth over $14,000.
You have a boyfriend?
This, of course, isn't like the
Yeah, I
Roblox
do,
ball
but
that
he
you
doesn't
know.
have to
This
know.
type of old golf ball is called a gussie ball and was handmade by a carpenter from
You wanna
work.
go out?
Just imagine taking a
Sure.
shot so bad you can't find the ball for 150 years. Yeah, something tells me that guy never got a hole in
You got a
one.
fat ass, by the way, Amy.
Next up is mastodon
And nice
skeleton.
tits,
Mastodons
too.
were ice age animals similar to mammoths, but
Thank you,
far
baby.
rarer. The
You're
last known
welcome.
found of a mastodon was way back in the 1940s. That was until 2016 when one Michigan man found something odd in his backyard. He thought it was the skeleton of a goat at first, but an expert came to check and even they had no idea what it was. So they called a fossil hunter who confirmed this was a skeleton of a mastodon. The man was shocked this was in his backyard, but it is an amazing find that actually helped scientists learn more about this extinct animal. 10 shocking discoveries inside people's homes. We all have a rough idea of what's inside our homes. But it's once you start snooping around attics and basements or knocking down walls for renovations that you begin to find some other things you didn't know were in your house. These are some of the most mind-blowing things found hidden in homes. In some cases, they changed the person's life. And that's number 10, we have mummies. In 2013, a 10-year-old German boy named Alexander Kettler was visiting his grandma's house. He asked if he could look around his grandmother's attic, as many kids like to do. She hadn't been up there in 60 years, but said yes. When Alexander got up to the attic, he made one shocking discovery. In the attic was a real Egyptian mummy wrapped in paper inside a sarcophagus. The body wrapping was machine-made, meaning this was one wealthy and powerful person. Not only that, the hieroglyphics and the casing of the sarcophagus would make this very expensive. And I'm not talking about a few $100, I mean millions. Alexander was shocked, and you probably are too. I mean, how could an Egyptian mummy end up in an attic in Germany? Well, it's really pretty simple. The sarcophagus was bought by Alexander's grandfather as a souvenir from a trip he made to North Africa in the 50s. Now that is one amazing souvenir. The mummy is now in a museum in Hamburg, Germany, and is quite a sight to see. If you ever hear noises at night, it's probably nothing. But what if it's not? That was the case for one South Carolina woman named Tracy. In 2012, she heard some odd noises coming from her ceiling. She ignored it at first, as things often move around, and noises are usually just nothing. But at 2:30 a.m., a nail that was hammered into her ceiling fell to the floor. She sent her son up to the attic to check what was going on, and he found the most terrifying discovery ever. Inside the attic was her ex-boyfriend, hiding away and spying on her. She dumped him 12 years ago as he had to go to jail, but he was released, and somewhere down the line he'd snuck into her attic and was watching her every move. He'd stayed there for 2 weeks, and police found cups of food, drink, and you know what. He'd written Tracy love letters from jail, but she'd ignored them. So the only logical explanation was to camp out in her attic like a total creep. We've all heard of clingy exes, but this is getting ridiculous. Next up is comic book. Okay, how is a comic book a shocking discovery? Sure, finding some crusty old Simpsons magazine wouldn't be an amazing find, but when David Gonzalez purchased a cheap house in Minnesota in 2010, he made quite the find. He was exploring the attic of his fixer-upper house and found some old newspaper and insulation. But within those, he found something that would make any nerd salivate. That is, the holy grail of comic books. That's right, David found Action Comics #1. The comic is special as it's super rare, and it's the first ever comic featuring Superman. The comic book wasn't in mint condition. It still sold for $175,000. It's not the $250,000 it should have sold for, but it still made the price of the $10,000 event raise a few eyebrows. This is because one Russian gymnast named Ksenia Ryzova kissed a fellow Russian gymnast, Tatiana Berova. Some people were shocked by this, and the Olympics actually received many complaints, while others were fine and assumed it was a European custom. But it was actually to promote global equality, especially in Russia, who have a bad reputation for this. It became a media circus, and the press was all over the story. Whatever your opinions are on the kiss, it went...
Oh, you're a good one.
Next up is Man on the Moon. It's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. Those were the words that stunned the world, and is associated with one of mankind's greatest achievements, landing on the moon. In 1969, 600 million people watched as Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. It was one of the biggest broadcasts ever, with the second highest viewing figures, falling short of 150 million people compared to the Prince of Wales and Princess Diana's wedding. But it was still a massive event that united the world and made new leaps in space exploration. If you're old enough to have watched it, you may remember the excitement of the day. Some people didn't believe it was real, especially older people, as going into space was such a bizarre concept for them. People's jaws dropped as the US flag was planted on the moon and the famous words were spoken. The Apollo 11 mission has gone down in history as one of the most amazing live television broadcasts ever.
Love it, baby. Love it too, Amy.
But they're not always
I know that I am.
News anchor's mistake and misfortune.
You got them
He was
right.
having a car to clean the frost from his windows when suddenly...
Let's pause a bit. Let's go to here. Let's go to here. Fair enough? Yep. Close it. Got it? Rocket 2. So rock this too, of course. Yep. Good. Let's chill here. Done. I know. Press play.
His car door locked. He was then stuck outside his car in the snow, forced to do his news report from outside his car. He then called for help, and the news station sent someone out to open the door. This blunder didn't get him into any trouble, and his co-hosts were laughing hysterically as he was stuck outside in the cold. It's a mistake we could all make, but thankfully most of us aren't news reporters. And luckily for the man, he wasn't too far from the studio. This news report is not only memorable for those watching live, but the internet too, as a clip was posted online. And I'm sure this is the most memorable broadcast this guy ever did. He seems quite upbeat about it though, so at least he was a good sport.
So bad. Help. And somehow the door locked. I'm in Laurel by the Target store off 202. Door open. Here comes Patrick. Hang on. He's getting it. Wait. Oh! Wow!
Next up is Balloon Boy. This is one news story that shook the world. In 2009, a story from Colorado was reported live. A boy was stuck in a gas balloon after his parents let it go. The media began to chase the balloon in their helicopters and made it into a massive event. After a 50-mile flight that lasted 1 hour, the balloon landed in Denver International Airport. Police and airport officials rushed to the balloon, but to their surprise, the boy wasn't in the balloon. They sent hordes of police to find the missing boy, who they feared had fallen out. They searched everywhere, costing a lot of money and resources. But eventually, the couple admitted it was all a hoax. They were sent to jail for 20 days and were made to pay $36,000 in fines. Although it likely cost a lot more to pull off this stunt, it has since gone down as an unforgettable TV moment, and later adapted into a musical comedy named Balloon Boy the Musical by Billy Reese. Next up is the best weatherman in the world. We all can't pronounce some words, especially those in other languages. They can be tough, but one language which is very hard to pronounce is Welsh. This is because they have far less letters, meaning odd pairs of letters are often used in words, and the words can sometimes be very long. So, what happens when you have to say the world's largest place name on a weather broadcast? Well, if you're as good as Channel 4 weatherman Liam Dutton, nothing. He said a 58-letter place name and nailed it first time. He looks very pleased with his accomplishment, and rightly so. He then said, zip it, and you will get a chance to talk later. I'm going to give you a chance to talk. But apparently Franklin just kept talking, so he decided to tape his mouth shut. I'm sure your teachers in school joke with you, saying they're going to duct tape your mouth shut. But this judge really did it. He grabbed a bunch of red tape and taped this guy's mouth shut. Franklin said this was very humiliating, and the American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio criticized the judge's actions. But comment below whether you think this judge was justified or not. Next up is haircut. So here's another instance of an eye for an eye. One day, Caitlin Lopan and her friend were on trial for bullying a girl. That's right, these two teens were bullying a 3-year-old girl at a McDonald's. But I don't mean bullying by name-calling. They actually cut off this 3-year-old girl's hair. The judge was so enraged with Caitlin, she told her she had to get a bad haircut. That's right there in the courtroom, she made Caitlin get a bad haircut as punishment. This is a very crazy punishment, but did the judge go too far?
No.
Next up is Savage Judge. So, judges are supposed to be very professional, but it's clear from this list, sometimes judges can lose their cool. Well, that's exactly what happened in 2014 to Judge John McBain. One day, a woman named Camilla Gammett was on trial for taking the life of her boyfriend. One of the family members was speaking about how sad it was that he passed away in court. But while the boyfriend's family member was giving a heart-wrenching speech, Camilla said, "Is that it?" She very rudely interrupted, and that's when the judge went crazy. The Michigan judge, John McBain, got very angry and was shouting at Camilla. He said, "Shut your mouth or I'm going to put some duct tape on it." That's right, just like the judge from before, except he didn't actually do it. But what he did say made everyone's jaw drop, including Camilla's. He said, "I hope you die in prison." Judges are supposed to be fairly impartial and only rely on facts. But it looks like Judge John McBain really did lose his cool. Camilla was given a life sentence, so she may well pass away in jail. But it's pretty crazy a judge said this in court and stunned everyone. Next up is #sorry. So this one took place in France in 2012. One day a man named Fluzin Baptiste was complaining about his local politicians on Twitter. But he was complaining in a very, very rude way. He called one of them a son of a B and another a big F. That's right, I can't even say the words on YouTube. I'm sure it sounded a lot more fancy in French, but these politicians didn't really care about that at all. Instead of roasting them back on Twitter like some other politicians may do, I'm looking at you, Trump. No, instead what they did was sue him for defamation. The court actually agreed with the politicians who were roasted on Twitter, and they gave the man a pretty bad sentence. Not only did he have to pay 5,000 euros, he also had to send 466 apology tweets. The tweets all had to say, "I have severely insulted Jean-Francois Cope and Nathalie Moritz. I regret and I apologize." That's right, just like Bart Simpson repeating the same thing over and over again on a chalkboard, he had to do the same thing on Twitter. I'm sure he lost a lot. Next up is Dog in School. So here's one which will really leave you scratching your head. And this is another one from Judge Michael Cincinnati, who made the woman spend the night in the woods.
So much pain in her hips. Then he saw her legs, twisted and mangled, bones piercing through her skin. Her once white fur was now painted with dark, grimy blood. Her hooves were red and glossy. It looked like the outer layer had been scraped off, leaving the tender inner layer exposed to outside. Ed felt dizzy. His mouth was dry. All of a sudden, his heart and lungs were lead, weighing him down. He turned towards the barn's door, leaving his mutilated companion behind. He ran towards his house as fast as his 67-year-old legs would allow, leaving another trail of disintegrated dead grass beside the first. As he got closer and closer to his home, he could make out the silhouette of his spouse preparing his breakfast through the kitchen window. He couldn't let her see what he had. Ed threw himself through the side door, with his mind set on one thing, pushing away chairs, tables, and any other unfortunate object his father and had simply been a decoration on Ed's mantle for the better half of 20 years. Dottie's anguished howls were now so loud Ed could hear them from the outside of the barn. Ed could feel her pain more and more with every step he took towards her. He found the cow the same way Ed left her, and the ounce of hope he had had that when he'd return she'd be better was bulldozed. Ed attempted to take one final look at his cow, but that deformed, bludgeon mound of flesh, bone, and blood that sat in front of him was not the cow he had come to love. He pointed the gun at what he was barely able to identify as the head and gritted his teeth. Ed didn't have the words or the time to send his friend out with a proper farewell. He just knew it needed to be done. With all the muscle he had that wasn't overcome by emotion and terror, he slammed the trigger back. The barrel erupted with the force of a wrecking ball. Shotgun pellets and skull fragments exploded out the back of Dottie's head with such power they got stuck in the wooden wall of the stable. A sense of calm washed over Ed as the splattered blood and brains of the cow dripped down his face. Emotionless, Ed walked inside, sat down, and ate breakfast, his face still softened with Dottie's blood. Ed didn't finish his chores that day. Instead, he phoned the sheriff and explained the story. He asked the sheriff if he could come down and investigate to hopefully find an answer for what had happened to Dottie before Ed went in to check on her. The sheriff, a stocky man around Ed's age, give or take a few years, arrived at the farm around 1 p.m. Ed greeted him solemnly and began walking him in the direction of his deceased cow. On their way to the barn, Ed noted the circles of dead grass, not wanting to leave out any details. The sheriff didn't seem interested at Ed's mention of the farm's vegetation. They smelled the cow before they opened the door, and when they did open it up, the stench of death hit them like a brick wall. The rotten stink pushed back against the two men as they walked towards the source. It was trying to keep them away. Flies had already started to migrate onto the fresh carcass. They were so busy gnawing away at the cow's exposed innards that they didn't notice the two men choking back vomit at the side of the body. The reality of the situation phones. All of his nerve endings connected back to his brain. Then another touch on his forehead. No more feeling, only sight. But his eyes weren't open. It was like what he was seeing was being projected to his brain directly, and he was incapable of turning away.
I'm talking out of cash for a second. I bought some cash on this server, and I think I've been scammed. So, if you ever go onto this server, do not buy fucking cash. Unless you want to get scammed. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Then his wife appears. She stretched out on a table. Her mouth was open, her eyes unblinking. If it weren't for the slight rising and falling of her stomach, she would look dead. With his eyes stuck on his seemingly comatose wife, Ed watched as a long gray finger hovered over his wife's head and slowly tapped her forehead.
Yeah, go.
With that touch, the skin on her forehead began to part as if being slit with a razor down the middle. Ed winced, expecting to see blood, but there was none to wince at. Her skull was now visible, pearly white as if it had been polished. The finger returned over her head. Once again, Ed watched as it lightly touched the naked bone between the separated flesh. A crack formed in the skull and started to widen. The skull began to split further, like someone was driving a chisel down in the center of the woman's head. Ed tried to close his eyes. If he could, he'd dig them out, but the image of his suffering spouse prevailed. There was now nothing shielding her brain from the outside world. It knew what was coming next.
Take your
Braced
picture.
himself to see that leathery finger stretch out once more. Like clockwork, it slowly emerged from just beyond its visual horizon.
She halts.
So no one. God damn, you know how to cook. Thank you, baby. You're welcome.
He resumes their stroll. Oh. They approach the park gateway. The family donated it all to the city. It was demolished a year later, except for these two stone lions still guarding the entrance. They pass a historical plaque with a description of the original estate. Sorry, I'm confused. How exactly does all of this tie in with our murder scene?
That's just it. None of it does. Sutro did have some bad luck, but his successes in the end far outweighed his failures. I cannot explain why those women's remains were placed at that spot on his former estate, 9 decades apart. Some piece of her appreciates his honesty. A thought unsettles him. And never mind that it would take something inhuman to kill like that, and for this long. There's a crash from the tent. Charging back, she leaves him hobbling behind. Finally reaching the site, he attempts to steady his breathing. The sergeant and rookie heave an injured investigator from a breach with a layer in the center of the lifeless circle.
Although I am.
What is that? Rico asks. A coffin? Sergeant West studies the damage. Your thoughts? Bucky puts on a confident face. Well, this whole park actually used to be the land of Rudolph Sutro. The rook, correct? And, she continues, it had this old graveyard. She snaps her fingers, which also explains this woman from the 1930s. West nods. I was asking Dr. Dace. She recoils. Dace stoops and peers into the dark cavity. I believe you're rushing to conclusions. She shrinks and gives Rico a dirty look. 2 hours go by. A ladder is lowered through the dim, dusty air. Chai pokes his head down and snorts deeply. Whoa, spooky. Ew, gross. Bugby slaps his shoulder. Move. The ladder creaks as she descends into the cottage's cellar with a flashlight. The cellar is thick with dust. Furniture and broken statues are piled here and there. What a coincidence this was directly under the crime scene, Dace says from above. She looks to him and gives pause, then grips her growing headache. There's a thud, followed by a settling sound. She draws her firearm and creeps toward a dark doorway. It leads to a collapsed hallway. Chai brightens up. Hey, Gwen, ever watch Unsolved Paranormal Investigation Files? She holsters her weapon and groans. That's not exactly standard procedure. 5 days elapse. Dace, running late, yanks open the tent. He's startled by a woman with big hair and a spray tan 2 shades too dark. She shrieks and scurries around him while holding her chest. Close behind is a crew with cameras, mics, and other curious equipment. Chai follows with Bugby, both gasping amid swirls of dust. What happened? Everyone okay? Grinning, Bugby elbows her way to the front. Dr. Dace, thank you, but... Dust! The psychic theatrically declares with a Texas accent. That's what happened. I have asthma. I could have died down there. Dace shows confusion. But no presence? No evidence or impressions? I'm not at all psychic, and that place at least gives me the heebie-jeebies. The psychic glares at Bugby. I felt nothing down there at all. Let's go. Wishing she were somewhere else, Bugby gives Chai an icy stare. With the dust settling, Bugby descends into the cellar. All results still come up negative for any significant toxins or pathogens. We've even tested for radiation. Dace follows, letting out a cough. Regardless of our once we step out, our bodies do rejuvenate. Smart place to dispose of evidence. I'll give...
Let's pause it. Let's go chill out in the front. Come on.
Got it, baby.
Good girl. Let's leave my door open. Let's go chill here, cunt. Press play.
Just in time, too. Gwen, where's this coming from? You think we gave you access this whole time because you're such a gifted intellect? He shows surprise. Please move away from that thing. I believe it's affecting you again. Yeah, that must be it. Why do you think Sergeant West kept a homicide detective on an archaeological excavation?
Have no bond.
He is at a loss for words. You never asked me about her case, identity, or who may have taken her life. You only cared about this goddamn circle. That's because you resented it every time I established something you couldn't. She gathers herself. I think at your core, you are a good man. You called in the body because you wanted to get caught. I think you're reaching and desperate. This won't get you your badge back. She winces and shakes it off. It was the next best thing to turning yourself in. Sorry, he counters. Seems like a stretch. Her composure crumbles. But you're such an insufferably condescending, self-indulgent bastard. You found yourself enjoying it. All the while, part of you hoped I would finally stop you. He notes her position, 2 steps from the precipitous edge. Listen to me. It's that ungodly abyss. It's influencing your head just as it did even mine a few moments ago before you pulled me away. With murderous eyes, she cocks the pistol. Brash enough to call in a murder you just committed. He discreetly eyes her weapon and takes a careful step closer. She tenses up. Gwen, were we ever really friends then? Her heart sinks. Were you always thinking about killing me? He hesitates and calculates his distance to her weapon. She tears up. You made me feel small, and you would listen to Chai, but you wouldn't listen to me. He reflects on her words and then shrugs. Shadowy depths. It's over, she says. I lost. She swings the gun into her mouth and clenches her eyes. Stunned, he stands, frozen. Starting to squeeze the trigger, she flinches at the sound of a distant boom. Disoriented, she scans about. What was that? I believe our bulldozer fell in last night, finally hitting bottom. The ground quakes. He glances to her gun and then to the pit as 1,000 thoughts race through his eyes. Dear God, I understand now. She looks about with a lost expression. I was still thinking like a mortician. Death was always at its core, but on a far greater scale than I imagined. She struggles to process what is happening. This is not a tomb, Gwen. It's a vault. A vault? But death, how is that valuable? No, not that kind of vault. It's been hiding something, protecting something. Protecting what? That much energy buried deep in our world can have only one purpose. Her face goes white. He shuts his eyes. Evil angels sentenced to the abyss, long before Christianity. She puts the pieces together as he recites them. Still chained to the blackness, held there awaiting. She finishes it. Judgment Day. They set eyes upon the grisly pit. He turns away and mutters, Wow, I was really overthinking this.
whips around to the standing shield. In a blink, she is struck and slammed onto her back. Her exposed hand instantly turns gray as she screams in agony, releasing the gun into the depths. The sprinkling turns to rain. She looks up at his imposing form as they lock eyes. His gaze shifts to the toxic shaft beside her. He goes to a knee and grips her shoulder. Trembling, she raises her arm in a defensive posture. "Stay calm," he says while squinting through the fog. "It may come back around." "What?" "I'm not even sure it was human, but I am pretty sure you're his type." Panting, she eyes him with mistrust while growing dizzy. "What's happening to me?" "I believe the dead blood from your hand is working its way through your system now, poisoning you." The earth shivers. The shield tips toward them with a low moan as it sinks into the wet soil. He seizes her and pulls her well clear. The rain becomes a downpour. Mud sloshes down the excavation walls as the ladder topples into the sludge. Brandishing his cane, he stands guardedly over her while groping for a slow side look. "Just tell me, before I die. Tell me I pegged you from the start, you sick fucker." He appears conflicted. Most of the excavation lights cut out. Her eyes open wide as a twisted form lurches through the fog. "Dan, I just had a big realization, too." He kneels to her. "I am a shitty homicide detective." He smiles. "Yeah, kind of." Her eyes roll back into her head. He looks up as if suddenly aware of something and grips his chest. His collapse beside her barely registers. Her head spinning, she detects a shift in movement while sliding past him. Though innocuous, there is nothing to take hold of as her momentum slowly builds toward the pit's gaping maw through the syrupy surface. The wailing wind swirls up from the darkness. Struggling to focus, she manages herself up a bit, forcing herself to consciousness. "Dan." He remains motionless. The wind and rain pick up. The sinking slab tips toward her, but is caught by its restraining chains. Woozy, she discerns a nude, hunched figure bearing a gleaming hand sickle standing over Dace. It stares inquisitively at him and then directs its gaze at her. A faint whirlwind forms around the mouth of the abyss. Her squirming legs are but a few meters away as the shield strains against its chains in her direction. The weakest link reveals itself as it begins to separate. Peering back, she observes the deluge enveloping Dace, with the beast now absent. Slipping closer to her extinction, she perceives a strange, erratic sound rising from the pit. The funnel of fog and rain attracts lightning strikes, exposing glimpses of a pale form making its way up from the extreme depths. The ground jolts violently. The chains snap, and the shield crashes down, crushing the guardrails. She is allowed a brief exhalation. Her attention returns to the shield as it heaves upward. Immeasurable pressure keeps the substantial slab levitated, as if to receive her. Her panic magnifies as she scrambles to halt her advance. The quaking reaches a crescendo, and a full eruption blasts forth as the bulldozer's remains eject miles into the air over the Pacific. The force throws her back and restores the seal to an upright posture as the giant front blade of the battered machine collides with the earth before her. She lays still in the steady rain, half expecting some other biblical proportion event, when Dace drifts slowly by, otherwise unmoving. A low groan marks the shield's renewed, subtle sway. She reaches out and takes hold of him, only can either grip his body or the solid bulldozer piece. Grabbing the stable chunk of metal, she attempts to restrain him with her legs, but is unable. Stop! Stop! Please! Helplessly, she watches his inevitable progress toward the opening when he begins to rouse. Dan! Wake up, Dan! He goes inanimate once more. Throwing self-preservation aside, she releases the steel and reaches out for his leg as they draw closer to this abyss, which, it seems, will not be denied. Thunder and lightning explode across the sky. Failing to effect a rescue, she clamps her eyes shut, but then senses a halt in their motion and looks up. Braced before the hole stands the menacing, deformed soul. She squirms frantically to escape, but the steady sludge only delivers her closer. With a deranged shriek, it rears back its blade and swings down to her neck. Instinctively, she blocks it with her dead hand and feels nothing. Pleasantly surprised, she wrestles for the sickle. Alas, weakened and one-handed, she is unable. It clutches her by the jacket collar and raises her. Face to face, her expression goes blank as she gapes at its gaunt, grotesque likeness. Drool seeps from its swollen, wheezing lips, its human-like features mostly dead and blackened. Shaking her head, she cannot look away until her horror culminates into a piercing, defeated scream. Mustering her diminished strength, she ineffectually labors to force it into the abyss. It sets its sharp metal against her throat as if to measure its placement for a killing stroke. Raising it back, it hesitates. With a look of loss, she gazes into its face. Please. The wind howls against the shield as it continues leaning its way. With a feminine touch, she places her hand on its disfigured face and looks deep into its soul. Chai, look at me. He seems disoriented. She sobs. This whole time, tell me it wasn't you. Discolored fluid drips from his one functional eye, blinking rapidly and involuntarily. Slowly and deliberately, she presses her hand onto his chest softly. Offering no resistance, he tips backward into the deep with a distorted screech. She spots the shield coming down and raises her arm in a futile effort to block it, when she is ripped away and rolls just clear of the angry slab. Dace lunges but stumbles as it impacts with a deep, rolling thud. Afraid to look, she turns and recognizes that he did not escape the plunging shield. She slumps, curls into a ball, and breaks down. Exactly 1 year passes. The day is sunny at Sutro Heights Park. Wearing white sportswear and a realistic prosthetic hand, Bugby steps up with Dace's dog. Within a newly constructed concrete water feature, she floats several white lilies. A bronze statue of Adolf Sutro is mounted at its center, smiling grandly. A historical plaque displays his biography and a description of his cottage, which was studied. She lowers her head for a moment of silence, and then departs. The little pug remains and lets
Here's my number, baby.
She beholds the conspicuously solitary 25-foot
Here's my number.
circular fountain.
Thank you.
And gently pulls the dog away.
What theme park are we going to, babe? Baby study. It's a surprise. Cool.
And now, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHealth Online Therapy wants to remind you to prioritize yourself. Talking with someone can help you figure out what's causing stress in your life.
Fuck
And if
off.
you already know